Yes, hello viewers. I'm Kamar Cheema with my YouTube channel Kamar Cheema, and today I requested Michael Kugelman, who works with the an American think tank, and he's a deputy director of the Asia program and senior associate for the Wilson Center. In fact, and he is known as the leading voices on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. And he appears a lot on South Asian channels, and he writes for many global newspapers and magazines. So, Michael, thank you very much for your time, please.
Good to be back here with you.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, my first question is regarding India has bought Rafale planes from France, and I was just going through the Stockholm Institute Peace Research Institute, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which says that India is among the second largest arms importer in the world, and around 9.2% of the total global arms import from 2015 to 19 has been taken by India. So, as an analyst and as a researcher, how do you feel that what Rafale means for India, and will India be able to get the desired results out of this purchase of Rafale from France?
Well, it's been striking, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, just how excited India appears to be about these acquisitions, particularly the Indian media, which was really giving blanket coverage to the arrival of these jets. It was actually quite amusing on many levels. But look, this is a prestige deal. I mean, these are prestige craft, and it's quite prestigious as India perceives it to be acquiring these, particularly given that the negotiations had taken so long and it wasn't really clear when the deal would actually be consummated. Certainly, I don't think we should overstate the impact that this relatively small number of new jets can mean for India's security capacities and its military capacities. Though I do think it underscores this long-standing goal of India, and that is to indeed modernize its military forces, which are in need of modernization, have been for quite some time. So, I think that we could agree that it certainly is helpful. These are things that India has needed for quite some time. But we're talking about a few jets. What is that going to do at the end of the day? Particularly when you look at India's main strategic rival, the Chinese, who are so far ahead of India on so many levels in terms of military capacity within various branches of the military, Army, Navy, and Air Force.
So, you're absolutely right. But I think the next question, since you compare it with the China, do you think that the issue or the problems which Prime Minister Modi had to face in couple of months, particularly the Galwan Valley incident, and how Chinese have taken over some of the land, and Indian political leadership says that the Chinese are not on their side of the land. Well, Indian bureaucracy, including the Indian ambassador to China and the Indian generals, believe that Chinese are inside their territory. Do you think that this Rafale is going to help Prime Minister Modi for his image recovery? Because there is a belief that Chinese are targeting the image of Prime Minister Modi because they believe that Prime Minister Modi has been very powerful inside country. So do you think that somehow Prime Minister Modi will recover with his image or will get back his lost reputation?
Well, that's a good question that I think requires a bit of a complicated answer. Certainly, on one level, I think this is true in the sense that India has been bogged down on its northern border with China for so long. It's lacked the military capacity to really retaliate against China in a meaningful way. And the fact that indeed it appears that there are still significant numbers of PLA forces on territory that India considers its own, the optics are not good for Modi. The optics are not good for the Indian government. But at the same time, I would argue that if you want to talk about a battle of global perceptions right now, that in fact I think India has really come out as a winner because what's happened in Ladakh over the last few months has really been picked up in a way by the world that India is the victim, that China was the provocateur, India was the innocent victim, and China has been staging multiple provocations. It has not been doing what it said it's going to do in terms of disengaging, even after these ongoing talks with India. And I think that it makes it easier for many key capitals, certainly Washington, but others as well, to depict India as really a victim of this rising threat of Chinese aggression. So I think it goes both ways. But certainly, indeed, as I said before, with the Rafale, with those jets, it's a prestige thing for the Indian government, and I think it highlights how India, has the ability to acquire some of the most prestigious, top of the line jets that you can get. But again, it's a one-time deal, and I don't think we should overstate the impact that it could have either on Modi's reputation or on India's military capacities, for that matter.
Well, true, that it is all about reputation and it's all about image. So, many people and observers have been talking that what happened at the Galwan Valley, what happened at the LAC, without firing a single bullet, the confidence of the 1.4 billion Indians brought down by China. So, as you are mentioning, definitely, it's not the one-time deal is not going to affect too much. So, the next question that we are here looking here in Pakistan and India, and since you are monitoring, that it seems as if the Chinese are encircling India. So, for example, right after last year, when India's cartography department in last October, November, when brought Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh in the Union territory, they brought the escalation into the Indian territory. So, do you believe that after that, Chinese really took it very serious, and they started encircling India? And the first thing we saw that here at the LSE, now Bangladesh-Pakistan relations are improving. Recently, the Chinese foreign minister, along with the Afghanistan, Nepal, and Pakistan, talking about the COVID-19. Do you think that the Chinese are encircling India, and we have seen some instances, and then there is a $400 billion Iran-China deal? So how do you see this move going on, and particularly this region?
Well, I think that India certainly has a large number of problems in its neighborhood, and I think China is one reason why. Though I think it's important to provide the proper context here that this talk of Chinese encirclement of India and this notion of weaving this string of pearls around India. This is of course not new. I mean, this goes way back to well before the revocation of Article 370 and the spat in Ladakh. This has been a concern of the Indian strategic community, or a good part of it, for quite some time. I do think it's the Belt and Road Initiative. I see BRI as the main vehicle, as the main engine for China's deepening footprint across South Asia. I think that's quite clear, not just in terms of what it's been doing with CPEC in Pakistan, but what it's been doing in Bangladesh. And also, I think particularly troubling for India, China has been able to make inroads in some of the smaller states in South Asia that have been traditionally very close to India. India struggles to get along with has struggled to get along with a number of its smaller neighbors, but particularly when it comes to countries like Nepal and Bhutan, which for quite some time were quite close to India. But you have the Doklam standoff several years ago, in which China was pressuring India in its own backyard, right next to a close friend of India's. And then, with this border dispute with Nepal, I know there are folks in India that believe that China has been pressuring Kathmandu to take a hard line on India. And so this BRI thing is not going to go away. I think that the pandemic, certainly with the economic slowdown that's caused, it may slow down the momentum in the near term for BRI, but I think China has every intent on continuing to build it out. I think that's the big concern for India. And of course, what New Delhi worries about, and this is something Washington worries about as well, is that in due course, BRI could start to have military components to it, that some of these new infrastructure projects that are built through BRI funding could be used for military purposes, such as housing Chinese naval vessels in ports, such as in Gwadar. So, I guess the best way to answer your question is that what we've seen over the last few months will exacerbate longstanding Indian concerns about Chinese encirclement. And, you could argue that, for example, the fact that just in the last few weeks you had new commitments between China and Pakistan for new investments in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, clearly that's something that both sides know will upset India. And yet there's more incentive for Pakistan and China to do that type of thing right now, given the very bad relations between China and India and Pakistan. So I think that we likely will see more of that, particularly as this India-China-Pakistan dynamic continues to be so volatile.
Great. So I agree with definitely if the military components get involved in this BRI, definitely everybody will be serious on this. But Michael, how do you see this that we here in Pakistan call this Modi's digital strike on China when TikTok was blocked or banned? Some of the social media apps were banned. Do you think that such kind of bans will affect China? Or because China is, of all the business China is doing, only 2% of Chinese businesses with Indians. So the Indians using this business or economic leverage on China, do you think that it is going to work, or the Chinese will get deterred by this, or the Chinese will get affected by this if the Indians keep on pushing China economically?
Well, let's be clear that banning 59 Chinese apps in India is not going to have an impact on the Chinese military's performance, whether in terms of Ladakh or anywhere else. I think that's quite clear. I think that this so-called digital surgical strike, whatever you want to call it, I think that was something that had to be done in order to appease public anger in India, given what happened in the Galwan Valley. And it's sort of not a surprise. India lacks military retaliation options, so naturally it would look to economic ones. And it's true that India is a significant market for these tech firms and these apps, these Chinese apps. But the Chinese economy is so strong, it is not going to be damaged in a big way by this move by India. And even if you start to have other countries around the world that start to ban these apps, and of course there's been some talk from President Trump that he wants to ban TikTok in the United States. But even if that happens, China's economy is so strong, and there's already indications that the slowdown that it had in the midst of the pandemic is starting to ease. It's going to be okay. And honestly, I would argue that India itself takes significant risks in trying to push back commercially and trying to reduce its commercial partnership with China. Because China has been a very significant economic partner for India. They've got one of the largest trade volumes in the world. It's a trade relationship stacked in China's favor, but still it's important for India. And given that India had been going through one of its worst economic slowdowns in years, even before the pandemic set in, and given that China has provided significant levels of investment in key growth areas in India's economy, whether you're talking about high tech or automobiles or whatever the case, India actually takes on a fair amount of risks if it decides to push back against its economic partnership with China. So even that tactic on India's part could well backfire.
Okay, so definitely, as you're saying, that it's not going to affect the Chinese military plans or China at larger scale. So, since in my understanding, and we have been looking that even in 2019 elections, I came to know that BJP invested billions for image building of Prime Minister Modi. And here in Pakistan and in the region, many believe that Prime Minister Modi will do everything to recover its image. And I asked one more question already on Prime Minister Modi's image. One more question I have regarding this is that is related to Pakistan and India. I was reading Fahad Humayun, who wrote a piece in foreign policy, I think, and he was basically propagating that to recover its image, Prime Minister Modi may go for any kind of limited scale military conflict with Pakistan. Do you believe that this post-Galwan incident, what has happened between China and India, there are any chances of any limited scale military conflict between Pakistan and India, particularly from the lens of recovering its image?
Well, I mean, certainly, given how tense the India-Pakistan relationship is, one cannot rule out some type of military crisis along the lines of what we had last February, and perhaps even more serious. But I don't think we should overstate that threat. I mean, first of all, if you talk about Modi wanting to repair his image by trying to provoke a conflict with Pakistan, well, that may help his image in India. but it certainly would not help his image overseas, where I think a lot of the key capitals that have been very supportive of India throughout the Ladakh crisis, and even after the revocation of Article 370, if they see India doing things that appear to suggest that India is a revisionist state and wants to unilaterally change borders, they could turn against India for sure. Something else to keep in mind here is that does India actually have the capacity to engage in some sort of provocation that could start a war? There's already been enough doubts about the Balakot strike. There are a number of analysts that believe that India actually missed its intended target, or that it didn't do what it expected to do. So, certainly there's something to say for India responding to provocations from Pakistan with some type of retaliatory, airstrike, limited airstrike across the line of control in Pakistan. But going beyond that, to talk about the idea of India trying to provoke a conflict, to me, that just seems hard to believe, just because it's unclear to me that India would be comfortable enough with its capacity to do so. And at the end of the day, does India really want a war? Now, certainly I know that in Pakistan there are concerns that India may have designs on trying to do something, so to speak, in these disputed areas that it claims, whether you're talking about Pakistan-administered Kashmir or Gilgit-Baltistan. Certainly the intensity and the frequency of the threats and the rhetoric coming from the Indian government have increased. But even there, India's got a lot to deal with at home. It's got the pandemic, it's got its economic crisis. So I guess one could make the argument in Pakistan that India would want to try to replay the Wag the Dog movie, where you try to provoke some type of conflict in order to distract the attention of your public from all the problems happening and things that are making your government vulnerable. But all that said, I don't think we should overstate the risk of some type of India-provoked conflict. But you know what? One thing we've seen with the Modi government is it is willing to take risks that previous governments have not been willing to take. The fact that it repealed Article 370, something that it had long promised to do, but had never been done until now, that's clearly is something significant. It wants to pursue very aggressively this Hindu nationalist agenda, but it would be a whole other level of magnitude for India to be provoking some type of conflict with Pakistan. I certainly hope that I'm right on this. I mean, the last thing India or Pakistan or the world needs right now is some type of conflict between these two nuclear armed states.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Nobody would like to have a conflict, and particularly in this struggling economy we have here in this part of the world. But one more question on India, and then I'm moving another topic, and that is that about when the time came after the second, when Prime Minister Modi won the election, India's Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, he said that that we are going to get, for example, Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, and the public notion in India is that if for the election of 2023, there is a possibility and there is a chance that Prime Minister Modi may attack in Azad Kashmir. And since they have changed the map, so looking at this public sentiments, the way they have provoked the public sentiment in India, particularly the BJP, to win elections. Do you think that there is a local slogan in Indian, in Hindi language, and they call it Modi hai to mumkin hai? It means that if there is Modi, then it's possible. So they have just provoked the sentiments. Although in Pakistan, we are waiting for them. If they come next time, they will get something bigger than Abhinandan. But how do you see this particular public sentiments, the way they have provoked in India?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think that anti-Pakistan sentiment is particularly strong right now. I mean, it always is, of course, and it had been heightened after the Pulwama attack. And then, I think that the BJP really politicized the Pulwama and Balakot strike. It took it on the campaign trail in the 2019 election, and I think that it was one reason, not the only reason, but one reason why Modi was reelected by such a wide margin. So clearly, politically, it pays to be hard on Pakistan right now. And you look ahead to the election, which is a long ways away from now. Indeed, I think that one would expect that India would continue to take a hard line toward Pakistan, but that doesn't entail necessarily provoking a war with Pakistan. And keeping in mind that the broader political environment in India right now, you basically don't have an opposition. The opposition has been decimated. The Congress Party is really a mess. It's a shadow of its former self. And unless things change in a huge way over the next few years, even if Modi struggles to recover the economy, and you have this extended economic crisis in India, even with that, it will be very hard for his party and for him to lose the election, predicting this even a few years ahead of the game. So what I'm saying is, I don't think you necessarily need India. You don't necessarily need, the Indian government doesn't need to try to provoke a war in order to guarantee its re-election successes, just because it has so many other things going for it. I mean, you look, even at the height of the pandemic, India has really struggled to get a handle on the pandemic. It's one of the most hard-hit countries in the world. Its economic crisis shows no signs of letting up, and yet Modi is still extremely popular. You show the surveys out there, he's still very popular. A lot of people still trust him and think that he'll get the country through this. So my point here is that I don't know if we necessarily need to think along those lines of trying to do something drastic, to do this rally around the flag effect, to bring more support to the BJP, because it already has so much of that support inside the country already. But yeah, I mean, you can't rule anything out. And I think that if you want to look at potential scenarios, I see India, the likelihood of India trying to do something in AJK would be more likely if it were to be something in retaliation to what it perceives as a Pakistani provocation. I mean, let's face it. I think you and I would agree. If there's another attack in Kashmir, in Indian Kashmir, along the lines of Pulwama, no matter what the details or facts are behind it, India would blame Pakistan for it, and it would use that as a pretext for retaliation. And that, I think, is where you would have to worry about some type of actions in AJK. But go back to what I said before. What options does India have? I mean, is it going to send troops across the LOC? I don't know. They don't want a war. So to me, I think there's a lot of questions as to what exactly it could do, what capacity it has to affect the type of change that it would want to make with the borders, if that is what it would want to do. And I'm not convinced it is.
You're right, but I think that is where the Pakistani leadership, the military and the civilian leadership, have time and again trying to tell the global community that there is an option that India can go for a false flag operation, and the things can get deteriorated, and the way they have been doing in the past. So to keep the international community aware that we are here waiting, that if something bad happens in Indian occupied Kashmir, don't blame Pakistan because India is already trying this. But coming to another last couple of questions, and those are about, since we are approaching, today is 3rd August, and in a couple of days it will be 5th August, and that is the day when India changed the status of Indian occupied Kashmir. One question is from you, that how much do you feel that Pakistan has been successful enough in internationalizing Kashmir issue after 5 August 2019?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess it depends how you define internationalizing. I think that Pakistan has succeeded in the sense that it has gotten Kashmir on radars around the world. I mean, that's quite clear. I think that, the world has been talking about Kashmir over the last year more so than they have been for quite some time. I mean, certainly since the Kargil war at the least. And of course, I mean, as you know, India would much prefer the world doesn't say anything about Kashmir, whereas Pakistan wants the world to be focused on it nonstop. And the fact that you have had, a series of governments around the world, parliaments, legislatures releasing statements decrying what India has done with human rights violations in Kashmir, that's significant. The fact that there were several, I think 2 meetings at the UN Security Council about the issue, that's significant. But I think beyond that, Pakistan's success has been very limited. I mean, yes, Pakistan has succeeded in getting Kashmir on the radar, but what beyond that? Not much. I think that what Pakistan would like to happen is for the world to essentially take Pakistan's side and start launching some type of campaign to pressure India to change its policies in Kashmir, and even to repeal its repeal of Article 370. That's not going to happen. I would argue that the world has generally stayed out of the Kashmir dispute, even after India's move a year ago. I think that much of the world has chosen to look at the Kashmir crisis the way Pakistan the way India would like it to be looked at, and that's as a bilateral internal dispute that should not generate any attention or mediation from the outside world. And I think we know why, right? India is a strategic player. It's perceived as a strategic player and as a key market by many countries, including those countries that one might expect would be much more interested in siding with Pakistan, like the Saudis and countries in Muslim majority countries in the Middle East. They've really been fairly quiet. There have been some exceptions, like Turkey, for example, which has been very emphatic in its support for Pakistan. But beyond that, I haven't seen much. So bottom line is, yes, Pakistan has been significant. It has been successful in internationalizing the issue because the world is talking about Kashmir in ways that it hasn't for quite some time. But in terms of actionable positions, the actual movement on trying to build a campaign to support Pakistan in its efforts to push back against India, that's where I haven't seen any success.
Yeah, right. Definitely, Pakistan has certain options, and the government of Pakistan has been saying that we only have diplomatic, political, and moral options, and beyond that, we are not going to support Kashmir issue on any other lens. So, Michael, one more question, and that is that definitely the Muslim world has been quiet on this, as you have mentioned, other than Turkey and other countries. The question of third-party involvement in this Indo-Pakistan crisis. Why there is no third party? Even the President Trump has kept on saying a couple of times, and I'm going to arbitrate or negotiate or whatever he can say. But do you think that why there is no third party? And do you think the importance of the great power apparatus, the British, the Americans, and the Europeans have reduced? Do you think the international system or the great powers influence has reduced, or do you believe the Chinese Indian influence has increased, that there cannot be a third party in this India-Pakistan conflict?
Well, it's a good question. And to clarify, as I recall, President Trump has said on multiple occasions that he would be happy to mediate the Kashmir dispute if asked by both India and Pakistan. And yet we know India will not ask, and because India won't ask, it's really not an offer of mediation. But to your broader question as to why there's not a third party, I go back to what I said before. I think that much of the world has looked at this in the way that India does. That this is something that's, there's really no reason or no right, no locus standi, to use a term that the Indian diplomatic community likes to use. No locus standi for any external player to get involved in this. You could argue that that's inappropriate, that's not right, given how serious the crisis is in Kashmir. But that's really how much of the world has looked at it. And I think that's an indication of the leverage and the influence that India has on the world stage. I think, to be very candid, it's an indication of the credibility problem that Pakistan continues to have on the world stage. There just aren't as many key capitals in the world that trust Pakistan and are willing to take its side, as opposed to India. It may be an inconvenient truth to hear, particularly in Islamabad, but I do think that remains the case. So, will that change? Could that change? Well, I think we'll have to see what happens in Kashmir over the last year. I mean, you mentioned that we're basically at the year anniversary of the revocation of Article 370. That clearly has not normalized Kashmir. It's not going to make violence go away, and you have to worry that things could get pretty rough in Kashmir. And if India were to step up its the very heavy-handed tactics it's used for so many years, then who knows? Perhaps you could get more pushback. If Joe Biden wins the U.S. election, I imagine he would perhaps be a bit more willing to criticize India, because I think that he will be influenced by some of the more liberal advisors and impulses in the U.S. political community on foreign policy. I'm not saying that it would be like if you had a President Bernie Sanders. I think it would be very assertive in criticizing India. But I do think you may get a bit more pushback from a President Joe Biden, though he values the U.S.-India relationship as well. He said that. He said that it's a very important thing, and there's strong bipartisan support in Washington for U.S.-India relations, which suggests that at the end of the day, no matter who's in the White House come January of next year, I don't think that from at least from the U.S. at least, you're still not gonna get a huge amount of pushback and pressure on India when it comes to the Kashmir issue.
Well, Michael, one last question, and this is very tricky. Many Pakistanis won't like this, but Michael, what do you see that why Pakistan's is not being offer is not being accepted? Why would if I rephrase the question, why the international community does not trust Pakistan when Pakistan says that we are not supporting the Kashmir issue? Uh, and there are no non-state actors which are being used by Pakistan. Although I believe that no non-state actors are now moving from Pakistan into occupied Kashmir. Why international community does not trust on this on this that no non-state actors are operating from Pakistani side in occupied Kashmir?
Well, I mean, it's you could have a whole other show on this question. It's a great question and a very complicated one. But I think that you have to look at that when it comes to U.S. perceptions of Pakistan. You have to look at the history of the relationship. It's a very long unlike the relationship between the U.S. and India. The U.S.-Pakistan relationship goes back many decades, where there was a fair amount of good relations during the Cold War era. But it's been a very volatile and rocky relationship where both sides, quite frankly, have ended up, being deceitful and lying to each other. But in terms of how the U.S. perceives Pakistan, I would argue that the whole Bin Laden affair had such a dramatic impact on U.S. perceptions of Pakistan, because it was really coming against the backdrop of what had been a lot of anger in the Washington about Pakistan's policies in Afghanistan, where there was this strongly held belief that Pakistan was openly supporting the militant actors that were attacking U.S. troops, even while denying it publicly and privately sometimes too. So I think that's where you sort of get a sense. It's the issue of terrorism, I think, which is where it's very difficult to get a critical mass of folks in Washington to see Pakistan's perspective. And it's the same reason why the U.S. takes a very similar, the U.S. lens on terrorism is very similar to that of India. It's sort of black and white. And that's why, when you look at the situation in Kashmir, you're going to get many Americans to support the India position that, you have what Pakistan may view as freedom fighters or rebels or whatever. They are regarded as terrorists here, because these are people that are killing people, and that's basically what it comes down to. It's as simple as that. Obviously, it's a very complex issue, but I think the fact that they share, the U.S. and India, and the U.S. and large components of the international community share with India a similar view when it comes to terrorism, and particularly Islamist terrorism. I think that's where. That's one reason why it's hard to believe, hard to think that you'd have more of the international community looking at things from Pakistan's perspective. Now, I know that, to its credit, your current government, the Imran Khan government, has hired lobbyists. Apparently, this had not been happening all that much. There's an effort on the part of the Pakistani government to try to reshape perceptions or narratives in Washington, and I'm sure other key capitals as well, about Pakistan and about its views and its policies and its actions. Too early to tell if that's borne fruit yet. I'm not sure if it has. If you look at how things have turned out in the year since the revocation of Article 370, but I know that's something that Pakistan's working on. But what a hardened critic would say in Washington is that there's no point and there's no reason to think that a lobbyist would change anything unless Pakistan changes its policies and makes it clear that it's changing its policies, such as 100% ending any ties or links to any type of terrorist organization, particularly those that stage attacks not only in Pakistan but in Afghanistan and in India as well.
Well, I think definitely people have its own perspective, but I understand that since India has been successful in linking freedom struggle with terrorism after this war against terrorism started, and Pakistan has an image problem and so many other things. And above all, I've been kept on saying here in Pakistani media and otherwise that the Pakistan's parliament need to have this truth and reconciliation here in the country to talk that what has happened in the past and how we have to move forward. Other than this entire parliament and the political elite, on all the stakeholders don't talk. They do not sit on table to talk that what has happened in the past and how we have to move forward. All the sacrifices Pakistan has given, they will just go in vain. Michael, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and it was wonderful to talk on India, China, and Pakistan, India, and how things are moving in in this entire region. Your opinion is already valued much in India, Pakistan, and youth from India and Pakistan really like to listen young from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time, Michael.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.